Hello, and welcome to another fiber and textile adventure. So this year, up on my roof here in New Jersey, I've been growing indigo, which is a big leafy green plant that creates blue dye. There are a couple different ways to actually get the blue dye out of the plant, the most common one being this pretty big and pretty complicated process that involves chopping down the indigo, fermenting the leaves to actually get the pigment out of them, and then creating an indigo vat. And that whole process is gonna give you that super deep, dark, traditional indigo blue color. I'm currently literally in the middle of that process, but unfortunately it's really, really long, so actually seeing results from that is gonna take a little while. And in the meantime, my indigo just keeps growing and growing every single time I chop it down. So right now the raised bed that's sitting up on my roof is filled with indigo again, and I thought this could be a really cool opportunity to try a different way to extract that blue color, and that's the fresh leaf indigo dyeing process. This process is much more simple. It pretty much just involves either literally smashing or blending the indigo leaves until the color comes out. And this produces a much lighter, more turquoise blue, which is really different than that deep dark indigo, but still equally as beautiful. I actually had the chance to visit a farm that was growing some indigo, and I actually created some samples for this project. I visited a dairy farm where the New Jersey Fibershed was growing a ton of indigo. And in exchange for doing some weeding and gardening, we got to play around with the fresh leaves. I brought a variety of yarn swatches from my stash and just kind of threw them in. Then I mashed them up with some salt. And then they turned this beautiful blue color. And the dairy cows seemed to really like my salty blue hands. So here I have tiny little bundles of yarn from pretty much every single fiber type that I have in my stash. So I have wool, wool and silk, silk, recycled silk, thick cotton, thin cotton, kind of a boucle, slubby cotton, linen, and tencel. And something that's really cool to see is that these fibers on the left, which are made out of animal fibers, are all much deeper and darker in color than these on the right, which are made out of plants. So here's my idea. I thought it would be really fun to make an all white piece of fabric that is made up of a whole bunch of these different fibers. So that way when the whole fabric's done, I can then take the whole thing and dye it in fresh leaf indigo. And ideally, if everything goes right, I should get some really interesting color variations just from the different materials that are existing inside the fabric. I think that should work, and I think it should be a really, really fun experiment. So let's do that. Okay, so for my warp yarns, I thought it might be kind of cool to play with that light-dark contrast. So for my dark, I'm gonna use silk. And then for my lights, I'm gonna use linen and tencel. These two produce almost the exact same color, but linen is super matte and super flat, and this tencel is so shiny. So I thought this would create some fun contrast, and then the light with the dark would also create some fun contrast. So let's give it a try. Alrighty, so I have my loom here with the warp all tied on and ready to go, and now we're gonna start weaving. I actually have a really specific project in mind for this warp, and that's that I want to make a v-cowl or a hero cowl. Basically what that is that it's a technique for creating a loop of fabric, like a cowl that you wear around your neck, but you do the whole thing on the loom. And I've never done it before. I've seen a lot of people do it here on social media and in books and in exhibitions and stuff. It just looks really cool. I want to give it a go, and I thought this could be a really fun project to try it out with, because for my indigo, I don't want to dye a ton of fabric, but I still really want to make something that I can wear and enjoy ultimately. So this just seems like a perfect fit. Like I said, I've never done this before, so definitely don't think of this as a tutorial. I'll put some links in this video's description of people who are actually doing it correctly, but I'm gonna show you the steps and hopefully it's gonna turn out good. Okay, let me first show you the warp I made. So hopefully you can kind of see what's going on here, but basically I did 1-inch stripes of my different yarns. It goes silk, linen, silk, tencel. Silk, linen, silk, tencel. Ideally, what's gonna happen when this project is finished is that the silk is gonna be a darker stripe, and then these two are gonna be light stripes with like slight textural differences. Anyway, so the first step of this hero cowl project is that I have to leave myself a lot of extra warp in the beginning of this project. I have some tied on here in the very beginning, but I'm also just gonna crank this forward quite a bit. And I'm just gonna visualize like a foot of extra warp, so. That should be good. Let me just tighten that. So now I have a ton of extra warp threads hanging out here in the front beam, and I'm just gonna start weaving like a normal project. For my lift, I have the same 3 yarns wound onto these big shuttles. And I did end up doubling each yarn here in the warp, so there's 2 threads per dent, so I also doubled these just to keep things even. Okay, now we can weave. This weaving ended up being a challenge. Something I didn't think about when selecting these yarns to work with was just how difficult these fiber types would actually be to work with. Linen is notoriously stiff and tricky, and pairing that with a super slippery tencel and silk just added even more to the whole challenge, which was then made even harder since I didn't have the right set for this project. All I had on hand was an 8-dent rigid heddle reed, and I just decided to go for it regardless. But all of this meant that I ran into a lot of tension issues and inconsistencies throughout the weaving. But even if this project isn't totally perfect from a traditional weaving standpoint, and even if the yarn choices that I made came with some frustrations, I knew that I'd learn a lot by taking on this challenge. This project involved yarns that I'm not used to working with, techniques that are totally new to me, that whole hero cowl idea, and then I'm gonna throw this all into a dye bath that I've never actually used in this way before. And the whole point is just to try something new and to embrace whatever happens, even if it ends up being a chaotic disaster. But spoiler, it didn't actually turn into a disaster at all, and I end up really loving the outcome. But while I was weaving it, I kept thinking to myself, oh no, I made some bad choices. Looking back though, I don't actually think they were bad choices. They were just unconventional ones that pushed me way out of my comfort zone. Maybe I wouldn't make these exact same decisions again, but now that I've gone through this trial by fire, I can hopefully make some more informed choices with these materials and techniques in the future. Once I reached about 60 inches of woven fabric, it was time to do the actual hero cowl part of this project. First, I unwrapped all of my fabric from the apron bar and let it hang while I untied all the knots at the beginning of the fabric. These were the ones that were holding the whole warp together so I could actually weave. And these now became extra long fringes. Then I looped my fabric back into the apron bar so that when I cranked it back, it would catch the fabric and hold everything under tension again, even though those main ties were no longer there. Then I treated those extra long fringes from the beginning of the fabric as if they were regular old weft threads and wove them in one by one in the order that they appeared in the fabric. I also ended up using a stick shuttle just to help me scoot the threads through the shed. And I repeated this over and over and over again until all the fringes were woven into the fabric. This whole thing is kind of hard to explain, but hopefully you can see what's happening here. When those long fringes are incorporated as weft, it creates a continuous loop of fabric, where the first part of the project that I wove from the very beginning is now attached sideways to the very last rows of the weaving that I'd done here at the end. And I just think that is so cool. It's such a fun and funky way to create a totally new shape. When I was done weaving in all those warp yarns, I cut my fabric from the loom. And then I knotted and twisted up both sets of fringes. I'm actually so thrilled with how this turned out. Like, is it absolutely perfect? No, but I still got that hero cowl effect, and I actually think it looks great. So as much as I want to turn this blue like literally right now, I actually have to do one more thing really quickly before I can go up there and get some indigo, and that is that I have to scour this fabric. Scouring is pretty much just like washing a fabric in really hot water just to get off any like dirt or grease or anything from the spinning and production process, and that's just gonna make sure that the indigo binds better to the fabric. I do have to be very gentle with my scouring process just because this does have silk in it, so I'm not gonna fully boil this fabric. I'm just gonna simmer it just a little bit with probably just like a drop of Dawn dish soap, and then once that's done, we can start dyeing. Welcome to the roof. I apologize for any wind or construction noises you might hear. It is unavoidable, unfortunately. Here is my indigo, and some might say it is very well past its prime. I've chopped it down twice already, so this is its third time growing back, and we're a week away from our first frost date, so it's very much the end of the season. It is flowering like crazy, which is supposed to reduce its dye potential. Like once it starts flowering, it kind of loses a little bit of its blue. But my thought is I still have so many leaves here. I'm sure we'll get some blue out of this. So yeah, let's cut it down. Alrighty, I have my indigo harvest, and all that's left to do is to blend up these leaves. To do that, I'm gonna use this really old blender, and it's no longer used for food. It is just for dyeing and other fun experiments. I even wrote on the bottom, no food. Anyway, my next step now is to remove all of the leaves from these stems. I don't want any stems, I don't want any flowers, just the indigo leaves. I'm gonna put them in this little blender cup, blend it up, and then pour it over my fabric. Let's do it, gloves first. I always forget gloves, and then my hands turn blue. These stems are so sad. Like literally, when I first chopped these down, they had so many leaves on them, and now there's just barely any. I think the poor little guys are just exhausted from making leaves all year. Okay, we'll start with this, and I'm gonna top this off with water. I also ended up filtering out all those tiny little blended leaf bits using a reusable strainer bag. And then I added some extra water just so the indigo could move freely all around the fabric. At first, everything turned out this super vivid green. This green is from a mix of all of the chlorophyll from the leaves and the indigo pigments that hadn't had the chance to oxidize yet. Once I rinsed the fabric and I washed away all the plant juices, the indigo finally got to react with air. And as it dried, that bright green slowly shifted into a really soft turquoise. Okay, so here's the result of my first dyeing attempt, and there's color, which is exciting, but for some reason there's no color whatsoever on either the tencel or the linen. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little patch of linen and some tencel right here. I don't know if it's maybe just because there was so little color in the dye bath that it all just like attached to the silk, or I don't know. Regardless, I do want to dip this again. This time I'm gonna get significantly more leaves, and hopefully we'll get a deeper, brighter blue. Oh my gosh, I forgot to filter it. Oh no. Okay, hopefully that's all gonna wash out. I hope. And here's my hand-woven, fresh-leaf indigo-dyed hero cowl. Is it what I expected? Absolutely not. But I conquered this challenge, I learned a lot in the process, and I still made a really soft, delicate, homegrown turquoise accessory that I know will still get a lot of wear, even if it's perfectly imperfect. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye!